You can get by with decent strategy, people, and execution, but not a day without cash. Cash is the oxygen that fuels growth. Cash becomes even more critical as the business scales, as growth normally costs. The key is innovating ways to generate sufficient profit and cash flow internally so you don't have to turn to banks or even sharks to fuel your growth. I'm Josh Peacock, and in this video, I'll be sitting down with 13 successful agency owners, and we'll be talking about everything about cash, what they did wrong, what they did right, and what they wish they did from the start so you don't have to make the same mistakes. Enjoy. Cash flow. Again, it's something that I don't really see a lot of people talk about, but we had Cody Jensen on the podcast recently who said profit is king, which means cash flow is queen. Mm-hmm. So yeah, has iPull Rank dealt with any cash flow issues, and what kind of processes have you got in place to stop cash flow issues?
So I definitely learned this the hard way because, like most entrepreneurs, you assume that once you get a contract, people will pay you when the contract says that they will pay you. And because we mostly work with enterprise, and when I say mostly, I mean like 90% of our clients are enterprise, it can be completely hit or miss, right? Like, because the accounts payable team never has the same urgency as the people that we're working with. And so what we had to do was implement this policy where we do an activation fee, which is just 20% of the entire scope paid up front. And what you capitalize on is that urgency that marketing team has, or whatever the client team has. They're going to go to the AP and be like, hey, we need to get this project started. You guys need to get this going. Because, especially on the enterprise, you can have terms that are like net 120, which I've never agreed to, but I've heard stories of, right? Typically, we're anywhere between like net 30 and net 60. Our standard terms are net 30. So if you go beyond that, the activation fee is higher. So a net 45 is a 30%, net 60 is 40%.
I think, we're essentially a professional services business, which is very fortunate from a cash flow perspective, which means that, if we're growing, we charge clients up front. So, we're month to month, all our revenue is not very lumpy. We just do SEO, digital PR, SEO, content, all that stuff that fits under that, SEO bucket. So it's all monthly recurring revenue. So we don't have that lumpiness of new projects coming in. So when a new project comes in, obviously we need to resource that, but we've already got money to resource that. So that's been obviously amazing, and it allowed me to bootstrap the business without any investment and scale it internationally without taking investment and to do all those good things. But in a downturn is more interesting because a lot of companies go through, downturns. What do you do? How do you manage cash flow? I've always been of the mind, in a downturn, I will take the hit. Just like in an upturn, I take the profit. In a downturn, I take the hit. So profitability drops in a downturn. Our revenue's grown significantly year on year, both in the UK and Australia. We probably did another, 3-4 million in revenue in Australia this year. However, our profitability has almost gone down like significantly, which means we'll probably make as much money as we would have last year, even though we've got significantly more revenue. That's a hit that I take, and that's good that I don't have investors, or that we're an independent, so that I can do that. But that's the reality of when you're in a downturn. You have to invest in new systems, new processes, so that hopefully in 2-3 years' time, I see the fruits of that. But in business, as many people would know, it's not always just win. I
think cash flow is one of the biggest things that hold businesses back, because straight away the business owner lives in fear. They live in fear and be able to move on to the next month. So I guess what I basically did is I made 5 rules when I first started Rise. The first rule was go after enterprise. And the reason I did that is because I think a lot of startup agencies go after the startup brands, right? Because they're the small, nimble, teams that can go after the small, nimble brands, and you can grow together and make money. But usually those startup brands have really bad cash flow problems themselves, and they inject that into yours, and they don't pay invoices on time. Whereas the enterprise businesses, they pay their invoices on time. They have a big finance team. And that's one of the biggest things that I knew straight away is we're not going after the small people. We're going after enterprise from day one, and we can go after the scaling and, you know, and the startups later on, because I need invoices paid on time to make sure I don't have cash flow issues. So that was rule number one that I went for. Rule number two is charge the same as the big agencies. I think too many people start up their agencies thinking go cheap and undercut. And I think that's one of the worst business decisions people can make. I think people will be listening to this thinking, no, I've done really well by undercutting the big boys, right? But it will only get you so far. It will only get you so far. There's so many business owners that I know that are trying to reverse that right now because they're known as the cheap agency and they can't get past 3 million, 4 million, 5 million, whatever it is. So I think straight away I charge the same as the big agencies. And the reason why people came to me is because I was faster. I was more creative. I was better than them in those ways. The second one is invoice promptly. So that's simple. Get a really good finance team. And the rule is make sure you're invoicing within X amount of days and make sure it comes in. 12-month retainers only. So in year one, I had 85% of everything we did was 12-month retainers. Very strict on that. I think a lot of business owners' problems is actually confidence problems. Confidence to say, no, it's 12 months only. Because they think, oh, well, they're going to leave. They won't. If they want you, they'll not go. They'll stay for 12 months. They'll sign a 12-month contract. And then the last one was keep 4 months running costs in the business at all times. 3 months is healthy. 3 months is really what they recommend, but I always go for 4 months. So I guess those are the 5 rules that I put in place. And as a result of that, I'm lucky to say I've never had cash flow issues. But I think it's because of some of the early decisions that I made, I guess, from day one.
Yeah. So I think if profit is king, then cash flow is queen, right? And in order, I think, to mitigate or plan for cash flow, you have to put together a forecast, right? So we work with our CFO to put together forecasts. We have data going back a decade that shows our attrition rates. It shows the cyclicality of the business. So we know when we can expect churn. We know when we can expect growth, right? Also, and I don't see this as much as I'd like to. I think in agencies is we don't begin work until we're paid in full, right? That's just how we work. That way, we're not constantly having to give terms to clients or anything like that. So prepay always, and then we'll go to work. And then the last bit is you need to be really close to your AR, your accounts receivable, right? Make sure that that's completely up to date. Checking it weekly is not enough. Usually you're checking it, well, at least a member of your team is checking it daily, making sure things are on track there. That's cash flow in a nutshell to me.
So I feel like the past couple of years, or maybe a year or so, it's taking people longer to pay. And it's kind of annoying. I don't want to be the guy who's like, having to call, to email. And also, like, I feel that, anyone who sends me an invoice, I got to pay them right away. Right. And I feel that way. I don't want to schlep them. So it's a balance, I think what we're trying to do moving forward is to get people on credit card, ACH, so that we're just, running their card or running their ACH on an ongoing basis. It's not going to work for everyone, but I think that's really the key. Right, just like with any service. So we're trying to do that better. We've in place better systems of like after a certain amount of days, this is the type of email we send. After a certain amount of days, we have a phone call. So that has helped as well. Sadly, I've had a couple people that I've had to send to collections, and with that, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So it's difficult, but I think we could solve this all just setting expectations better at the beginning and not waiting. Like, I think the problem that I've had is just being nice, right? Like they'll say, okay, we'll pay, right? And 1 month goes by, 2 months goes by, and then I really get messed over, right? But it's more like being strict. As much as I want to help this person, and I know that if I cut them off, I'm not going to get that money. But if I keep them on, I'm most probably not going to get the money either. And now I'm going to be spending all this time. So it's a difficult one, right? And I think the more you grow, the more you deal with it. So You know, as you can see, we're kind of fighting it on multiple fronts, and hopefully doing all these things together can help us.
I mean, there's the way I used to deal with them, and then there's the way that I think you probably should deal with them. I mean, used to deal with them was like, I've had those days where I've had to put payroll on a credit card. There's definitely, especially earlier on, there were payment cycles where me and my partners would just not take a paycheck and just be like, well, if we're going to make payroll, we don't get to get paid this pay period. So at least the employees get paid, but we're eating ramen for the next 2 to 4 weeks. And then, the way you should take care of them ideally is, there's a handful of strategies, but I think that the most sustainable one is preparing for shit to hit the fan from a cash flow perspective, preparing for clients to pay you late or not pay you at all, especially if there's like a change of the guard, right? Like, let's say you're a marketing agency owner and you're selling it to a CMO and they get fired and you've got an open invoice, or God forbid, 2 open invoices. And the executives that are there, they're looking at preserving cash flow. They don't give a shit about making sure you get paid if they're not using you anymore. So like, take them to small claims court, whatever, God forbid. The best way to be proactive, right, is to have at least 3 months of all operating expenses in your cash, like cash in the bank. Have at least the same amount of money, 3 months of operating expenses, and open AR, open accounts receivable, and hopefully less than 90 days aging on the street. I know lots of agency owners, especially small agencies that have all their clients pay on credit card. And if you can do that, that's great until you get to a certain level, right? Once you're over $100,000 a month, you're talking about $3,000 a month or $36,000 a year. It's almost a full-time entry level salary that you're paying in just processing fees. So, taking ACH payments, taking invoices, receiving, old school paper checks actually becomes, part of a cash flow strategy. And then the other thing, this was a really cool lesson I got from an accountant early on, which was like, hey, you should really try to have 2 payment cycles, like 2 invoice cycles for your agency every month. So like, making sure that, you want to try to keep it roughly 50-50, which is about half your invoices go out at the beginning of the month, and about half of your invoices go out in the middle of the month. And it's a really easy way to do it if you just put a really simple, process in place for it, which is like, whenever the deal signs, the invoice should go out the day the deal signs, right? Small agency, get the cash in the door. Don't wait for it. It's invoice immediately. I don't care if it's the 6th or the 12th or the 25th, invoice, get the cash in. But then depending on when that date was, they fall into one of 2 invoice cycles, right? So if the invoice, if the deal gets signed and the first invoice goes out and it's before the 15th of the month, then the next invoice is getting sent in the 1st of the month, and they're on the 1st of the month payment cycle moving forward. If it's after the 15th, if it's the 15th, the 30th, the 31st, they're on the 2nd payment cycle. And so all the rest of those invoices, for that client, all the rest of their invoices will get scheduled to automatically go out on the 15th. And so you have about, ideally, you want to try to constantly, it's never quite 50-50, but 60-40 even. But this way you've got cash coming in at multiple points in the month, and you want to try to structure your fixed payments too. Like if you can push some of your credit card payments to the end of the month, and try to look at putting a gap in between when you've got like big payments coming due and when your payroll cycles are. And most payroll cycles are the 1st and the 15th. And so try to push, payments on your line of credit or payments on a credit card or your software payments, try to spread them out a little bit. I think the biggest thing that really payroll is going to be the biggest expense, right, for any agency. But outside of payroll, if you can try to not have any other giant sort of balloon payments coming, because those put you in the most precarious position. There's nothing like having 25 grand in receivables and you've got 15 grand in payments that are hitting, and you've got the cash flow. It's just not physically in the bank at the moment.
Quick pause. If you're getting value from this conversation about scaling agencies and hiring top talent, I want to share something that might help you. Are you struggling to find A players for your digital marketing agency? We've got you covered. For SEO experts who turn rankings into revenue, head to SEOforhire.co. For paid media specialists who boost your bottom line, check out paidmediajobs.com. And if you're looking for foot rubs, you're definitely in the wrong podcast. All right, let's jump back into the episode.
Okay, so I am going to sort of touch wood here. We've never had not that we've not had cash flow issues, but we've never been in a position where we're going, shit, how do we pay the team this month? In our growth sort of journey, I have always probably obsessively managed sort of money in the bank and sort of runaway funds. So I've always been in a position that, my ultimate responsibility is to make sure we can pay the team at the end of the month. That is, as an agency owner, sort of the number one thing I have to make sure we can do. And in order to do that, it's almost accepting that cash flow can be unpredictable. Now, it can be unpredictable for a number of reasons, and I think that doesn't just mean clients aren't paying you, there's not enough sales coming in. It can be tax bill period, as an example. So I think, I have always obsessively managed the money in terms of making sure we have 3 to 6 months money in the bank that we could not take any revenue for. Realistically, right now it's probably about 4 months, in that as you grow, obviously that figure will come down a little bit, but it used to be 7-8 months. And I think what that's given us is it's given us an ability to not have to focus too much on individual months cash flow, and it allows us to take that holistic view. Now, I say that in terms of we've had no, oh shit, how do we pay the team next week? And that is by managing obsessively, by myself not going, okay, great, we're doing $1 million a year, I'm going to go and live a really lavish lifestyle. It's sometimes putting that common sense first and going, before you can do that, before you can go and sort of reap all the rewards yourself, you have to make sure you have that safety net there. But I think on the back of that, yes, there are months, sometimes more often than others, that you will spend more money than comes into the bank that month. And I think this is, when we talk about month to month cash flow, I think, we have implemented a lot of things there to make sure that we're in a better position to not even control what's coming in and what's not, but knowing when things are going to come in. I think that's my biggest piece of advice there. So as an example, thinking very carefully about when you invoice a client. We used to invoice a client, we would take on a new client, we would invoice them on 30 days at the end of that month. Effectively, we were on 60-day payment terms almost without realizing it. We were saying, okay, we'll issue an invoice after the end of the month, 30 days. That is 60 days after we started work. From a cash flow perspective, that is a 60-day payment terms effectively. So we brought that forward to say, okay, we're still going to invoice on 30 days, but we are going to invoice on 30 days from the start of the month. We're automatically bringing cash flow 30 days forward. We are also looking at things like bringing in an incentive for signing longer contracts. So I think in the agency world, one of the things is that agency revenue can sometimes be unpredictable, especially when there are ups and downs for businesses, the economy. Sometimes I think agencies make it quite easy for clients to go, okay, we're going to pull the plug in 30 days time. Now, whilst, I certainly think there's always a balance. One of the things that we've done is we will incentivize clients buying into that sort of longer term mentality. We will offer, as an example, a 10% discount on annual contracts on the grounds that we have locked in that revenue on set payment terms for 12 months. So it's managing cash flow. And I think it's cash flow management tactics as opposed to almost that shit, what do we do in an emergency? It's having those tactics in place to go, we need to know what is coming in the bank each and every month so we can plan accordingly. Building out things like that and, really stopping to think about, are there things we can do to optimize cash flow that are in our control? And I think, with things like payment terms, locking in longer term deals with an incentive, make sure there's an incentive for the client there. There are absolutely ways that you can do that and, put yourself in more of a position of control over that cash flow.
Because sometimes you can grow yourself out of business if you're not careful, right? So, you just have to be careful about hiring too quickly, mismanaging budget, putting budgets in place, making sure that you adhere and stick to budgets. There's also, some months where there's like 3 pay periods instead of 2, right? And so that could be a detriment to companies. So I'd say early on, just make sure that you are kind of managing everything that I just said properly. But then I would also, urge everybody to maybe get a line of credit as well, so that when there are those periods where you do have that third pay period, that you can kind of tap into that temporarily. But yeah, it's important. Like I said, I've seen agencies kind of grow themselves out of business, and that's not fun.
Well, honestly, the first thing I say to them or ask them is, do you have someone from a financial background, be it an accountant or a CFO, that can help you? And that's not me passing the buck off to someone. The reality is, I would encourage anyone run the business to get someone in that front helping, or in that front helping you. That's probably point one. I think point two then comes from what we just said, which is, it's kind of like, if you think about yourself in a personal sense, actually. So, you know, if you're like starting to save or starting to earn, I mean, practical advice is to try and first of all build up a bit of an emergency pot, so that, like, if you have to do work to the car, or if you have to maybe have some type of a medical procedure or whatever it might be, you have a small pot there that can cover those types of things. And honestly, when I think of the word cash flow for a business, I just think of the same type of thing. It's like, if you have a bad couple of months for whatever reason, you have cash in reserve to pay your employees, or you have cash in reserve to keep things going while you're maybe pushing extra hard to win the sales. So I suppose those 2 points are the main things that come up for me. It's kind of just practical stuff. But equally, if you want the more specific advice on things like cash flow, go to someone that can advise you on that. Because again, there are plenty of accountants out there. There are plenty of, and again, I think one thing I've seen a lot of recently is brilliant is, it's almost like that fractional CFO service, that there are some people out there doing that really well for agencies specifically now. And even on LinkedIn, like, there are people on LinkedIn that are putting out phenomenal advice just for free on there. So I think that's probably the main 2 places I point people to on that front in general.
Awesome. Shout out to my friend Joe Geekie. He's doing great finance stuff on LinkedIn. But yeah, honestly, we started the business when I was 23. And at the time, it was just all, right, we need to get clients, we need to get invoices out. And it was not looking into taxes and everything else. And honestly, it's something that I wish that I looked at the very start, because yeah, I don't enjoy going through QuickBooks and all of that when there's a massive mess in there.
Yeah, I think even just one more point that's more specific to agencies is, and this is something you don't really need to think about too much early on, but again, most of my clients will be at that stage where I'm saying, okay, you've got this one client in particular that's generating 40-50% of your revenue. It's not a problem necessarily. It's great you have them, but we're going to want to try and diversify things a bit here soon, because that is a stressor, or that's a strain on the owner. Because if that client leaves, which can happen, then all of a sudden, from a cash flow standpoint or financial view, you're going to hurt. So even just on that as well, it's understanding where your revenue is coming from and trying to build the agency in a way that's a bit more diverse.
Sure. I think cash flow has never really been a big problem for us, because we're blessed in that around 80% of revenue is retainer-based work, which obviously is easier from a cash flow management perspective. But I appreciate that a lot of agencies do have problems with it. Where our risk is around holding media spend from a PPC perspective. And then we also do like a lot of website development work. So you've got large projects, which we take income based on hitting milestones. So I guess there are our 2 areas that we have to manage cash flow more so than the retainer-based work. So we've just put a few strategies in place in terms of our billing cycles with clients and how that works, particularly on the media spend side. But I don't feel clients, they very much appreciate that we're a business at the end of the day, and cash flow is important, and it's not like a revenue grab or anything like that. It's basically just being able to pay the bills and do that. So we've actually been lucky enough, touch wood, that we haven't had any big issues from a cash perspective. But yeah, I do appreciate that it is a tricky area for agency owners.
Awesome. And you mentioned their billing cycles. We've had a few people on in the past where they'll have like 50% of their clients pay at the start of the month, 50% pay at the end of the month. Is that anything that J-Wing does?
Yeah, we do a bit of a combination. Some will bill mid-month and some will bill at the end of the month. So it depends on how we do the negotiation through the contracting terms. So yeah, I guess payment terms are always something of negotiation with the client. But yeah, it really depends on the size of the engagement, the number of services they're buying, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, obviously we've dealt with it in the past, especially during COVID. During that time, particularly, we had to make some difficult choices as clients were pulling back on marketing spend. In terms of we've always been really focused on scaling our staff to match the company's growth, right? So we were in a better position, I think, than to manage that more so than maybe other agencies were during that time. But during that time frame, obviously, we were prioritizing sustainability over rapid expansion, and we've always done that to some extent. So that from that perspective, we were somewhat prepared as much as you could be. But we're even more mindful today as we continue to grow our staff, our client base. Our general perception and philosophy has been sometimes trying to run a little bit leaner and prioritizing stability and efficiency. So we're always looking to try to find how can we be a little bit more efficient so that we never have to get to that point where we're doing layoffs. That's kind of the last resort that we would ever want to have to do.
In the beginning, it's easy because you don't have a ton of revenue. You can kind of monitor your bank accounts and see it coming in. As you get a little bit bigger and you get more meetings, there's more dynamics. We overhired, ran into some cash flow issues. I think it was around year 4, year 5, where we accrued a little bit of temporary debt. I came across Mike McAllowitz's book, Profit First. It was recommended to me by Jacob Badsgaard, the CEO of Disruptive Advertising. And we just started implementing Profit First. So now we got multiple accounts. It's a simple mechanism for monitoring cash flow. I think that can hold water from about 0 to 10 million. Now we're at 22, 23 million. And we just hired a CFO. It's not just operating off of monthly cash flow. Now we're having to do forecasting models, budgeting, things like that. I was slow to hire the bean counters because when I want to go and try something new, I want to shell out the cash, but it's a necessary component at this size.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. And if you did, we'll be releasing episodes every single week. So subscribe to join us on the journey. We also have a free resource in the links where I asked 55 agency owners what's actually working in 2024, all anonymously. No fluff, no theory, just real data. So that'll be in the links below, or check out some of our other videos. See you in the next one.